Have you ever wondered how much it costs to buy a house? Stay tuned. What's up everyone? This is Brian Castro with callcastro.com and eXp Realty. And today we're going to be talking about how much does it actually cost to buy a house? Because let's be honest, there's a lot of false information out there. And who really has $250,000 to buy a house, right? I mean, pretty much no one, right? Unless you know different people than I do. But before we get too into it, I want you to keep in mind, I am not a lender. I am not someone that actually gives out the money. This is a rough estimate based on what I've seen. And if you do want to buy a house, you want to get exact numbers from your lender. This is just an estimate, okay? And everyone's situation is going to be different. Like you'll see, some houses are more expensive to get into, some houses are less expensive. Maybe your credit's really good, maybe you have more money down. There's a huge variety of programs out there. And frankly, I don't know them all, and I don't know your situation. But this will give you a good guess for the average person buying their home. Your deposit. Deposit's the first thing that you do. Now the deposit's going to count towards the other numbers later that we're going to cover, but it is one of the first things that comes up that you have to have cash out of your pocket on day 0 before we can even start doing anything, okay? This number is going to vary, and what it is it's basically an amount saying that if we default on this whole buying the house process, you get to keep this money. So, as the seller, right? The bigger this amount is, the more serious it shows your offer is. Now that doesn't mean that you can't do a really low deposit. I've seen very, very low deposits before because people understand that first-time home buyers don't have a lot of money, right? Or certain other situations have popped up. But the bigger your deposit is, the more serious your offer looks. And in general, out here in Lewis County, your deposit's usually going to be somewhere between $500 and $1,500. Number 2 thing you're going to need, as soon as we get that deposit in, we have to get the inspection done, okay? So the inspection price is going to vary a lot because it's going to vary based on the company you pick and the size of the house, what all is involved in the house, what you have to look at, right? So when you're having the home inspection, it's really, really important because this is where you're going to find all of the problems with the house. You really can't skip this step. It is absolutely critical. In my opinion, it's the most important step of the entire buying process. If you have a really cheap inspector, which I don't necessarily recommend, and you have a really tiny house, I've seen it go as low as $250. Again, don't really recommend it. If you have a really big house, maybe it's pretty old, it can go as high as $650. On average, for most people, from what I've seen in the Lewis County area, it's usually going to be right around $500, maybe a little bit less. That's for a good inspector. Again, it's going to vary. And all these numbers we're talking about are going to vary. You should talk to your lender, talk to your realtor before you hold me to any of these numbers. These are my best guess to help you, okay? Don't be mad at me. The third thing we're going to have to do, once we're done with the inspection, is going to be the appraisal. Now the appraisal is complicated, okay? Some lenders will need you to pay the money for the appraisal as soon as the appraisal is due in cash. Some lenders will bundle your appraisal in with your closing costs. So for a lot of people, you will need this $450 to $950 in cash, but if you have good credit, you have a good lender, sometimes you can get the appraisal to be put off into the closing costs, okay? So you don't necessarily have to have this money in cash to get to closing. It's a good idea and it's really common to need it. And again, this is something you really can't get away from. This is something that we generally, if you have a bank giving you money, they want to make sure the house is worth the amount that they're lending out. Once we get past the appraisal step, we're then going to be going to the closing table, okay? Now at the closing table, we're going to have a couple different things. The first one is going to be the money down. Now the money down is when you're buying a house, right? They want you to put a certain percentage of the total amount of the house value down in cash. Now this value is going to change a lot. Every program has a different amount that you have to put down at closing. For example, right now USDA has programs where you can do 0 down. Sometimes if you do an FHA loan, you can do, which is usually 3.5% down, you can get down payment assistance that can knock that back down. If you're doing a conventional loan, a lot of the time it's about 5%, but you know what? If you go as high as 20, and that's what it takes to get the loan, you drop off insurance costs, and that's going to decrease a bunch of stuff. So this amount is going to vary tremendously, depending on the type of loan you're getting, the term of the loan, all that kind of stuff, your credit, right? So it's going to vary, but for most people, it's between 0 and 20% down. Usually between 0 and 5% down, if we're being honest. So then after we get that done, which is your money down, we have to worry about your closing costs. So here's the thing with closing costs. First of all, that deposit you have up here, it's going to count towards this and your money down. So that total money you need to get this part handled, okay, is going to have this going towards it. So if you paid $1,500 for your deposit, you can take that $1,500 and apply it to both of these parts because we've fulfilled everything we need for the deposit, okay? Past that, for the closing costs, we can negotiate it into the offer. So say, for example, you have a $100,000 house, which almost never happens. I'm not great at math, bear with me. and you have about, for most people, it's about 3% for closing costs. You're gonna need $3,000, right? So let's say in this example, you ask the seller for 3% for closing costs. Typically, when you make an offer like that, you're going to have to raise the price you're paying for the house a little bit. So instead of paying $100,000, you pay $103,000. $3,000 goes for closing costs, and now your closing costs are 0. So while that does increase your monthly payments, a 3% increase-ish usually isn't a big deal. Now, some lenders will charge you more for closing costs. Maybe they bundled in your appraisal in there. Maybe they are just a little bit more expensive lender and they're getting you a better rate. But whatever it is on this part, it's going to vary. Okay, so you need to always make sure you talk to your lender, talk to your realtor, figure out what exactly your closing costs are going to be, and make sure that you've got all this stuff all figured out. Now, I know it looks scary, right? Because if you look at the 6% and the 20% and the 950 and the 650 and the 1500, it adds up. But for most people, they're not going to do that. I've done a lot of deals lately where they've got 0 for closing costs, 0 for money down, 0 for appraisal, because it's bundled into the closing costs, right? And all they've had to pay for was a deposit and inspection. It happens, and it can be really affordable. But there are some extra surprise expenses outside of just getting the house bought, right? So first, we're gonna have utilities, okay? So you move into your new house, the first thing you gotta do is you have to get the water running, you have to get the power on, you've gotta set up the trash, right? And a lot of these things, internet too, I like internet, you're on Facebook, you've gotta get all that turned on. A lot of them will require a deposit, a lot of them will require you to pay money up front to get it on. For most people, it's going to be around $300 to $1,000. Again, every city is different. Every house is different. Maybe you have well and septic, and you have a solar panel on the roof, and that's all you need. You don't care for internet. Could be 0, right? It's going to depend, but be ready for some utility costs, okay? And then we have an extra surprise. It's going to be moving. And that's not free, right? I mean, even if you have a truck and you have some buddies, you still got to buy pizza, okay? But worst case scenario, you're going to be looking at picking up a storage container, maybe an extra month of rent to make sure that you can move everything out in time. U-Hauls cost money. Make sure you have all the money set aside and all the resources set aside you need to make the move, okay? And of course, there's going to be some extra surprise stuff that pops up. And the last thing I do want to bring up, which is not on every transaction, all of these are pretty much universal. They're pretty hard to get away from these, but there are some surprise costs, okay? For example, you might have any of these things, okay? If you have a well, you're gonna need a well inspection. It's a couple $100. If you have a septic, usually the septic is pumped and cared for by the seller. but maybe not. Maybe you negotiate bad. Maybe that's part of your deal where you're going to take care of it. That's going to cost extra money. Maybe you're getting a manufactured home. You're going to need a foundation certificate. That's going to cost a couple $100. Maybe you're in a floodplain. Insurance is expensive. You'll probably have to get an elevation cert. That's going to cost money. All kinds of other factors could come in that could add up on mostly this part, right? It'd be mostly in your inspection area would be where most of these surprise costs are. Not all of them, but a lot of them. You know, maybe if you are in flood, you'll have some insurance increases that'll make things more expensive. But in general, if you're getting a stick-built house with all the basics, this is a ballpark range of what you will need. If you have any questions, you know what to do. Either call Castro, or for this one, talk to your lender. They know better than I do. Maybe this will make you brave enough to give them a call. Talk to you guys soon.